How you get so much favor on your side? Accept the measure, Lord and Savior, I replied.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is just another critic. We just finished up championship week. We're going over a quick recap as well as my thoughts on the college football playoff, who's in, and maybe who's going to end up in the final. We'll talk about that here in a second. As far as what we saw conference championship week, LSU, man, they put on a freaking clinic on both sides of the ball. Obviously, we knew going into that game, Georgia really didn't have a great chance of winning that game, depending on how well their defense would play. The success of their team play is predicated on how well their defense is going to play, right? Because if their defense isn't making stops, Georgia isn't able to play the way they like to play, slow, methodical, work their way down the field with their run game, take their run game and play off of that with play action. And that just wasn't really there for them. They really had to set up in the spread for most of the game because they were playing catch-up and they just couldn't stop Joe Burrow at any time. Burrow was making plays like I talked about in my predictions. Even if you get pressure to the guy, you have to bring him down. And even when you get hands on him, he's not going to stop fighting to make a play. And we saw that on a consistent basis in that game versus Georgia. LSU played lights out. And also, another thing I mentioned, we've been seeing LSU's defense trend in the right direction throughout the past few weeks, and I kind of talked about, is that what we're going to continue to see as the weeks go by, right? We saw them step up big time in that Georgia game. Also, Jake Fromm missed a few throws. That's also to be considered. But overall, great performance by LSU. The win, 37-10. They take the SEC and take the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. They're going to be taking on Oklahoma in the semifinal. Ohio State, they played Wisconsin. Another game which I talked about in my predictions. Didn't really go in depth because I had it's kind of an obvious outcome. But Wisconsin put on a big time first half. Second half, their middle linebacker, Chris Orr, who's practically the leader of that defense, he went out, did not return for the second half. Which was a big-time loss, and we saw that where Ohio State pretty much scored, I believe it was 28 points unanswered, and essentially ran away with the game. It's something I talked about. My final score for this game was actually 34-20 Ohio State, so 1 point off, not too shabby, but I talked about it. The talent discrepancy would eventually help Ohio State pull away in this game. The talent discrepancy plus hard work, which we know these kids and these guys at Ohio State, they're always working hard. They've got great coaching staff and they've got great player development. So all that combined with the talent that they're already bringing in, it was always going to be tough for Wisconsin to hold on to that lead. And we saw that fade away slowly in the second half. Number 3, Clemson took on Virginia. Just pretty much what we expected, a big-time blowout. I didn't expect this big of a blowout. 62 points on Virginia, allowing just 17 points. Big-time win for Clemson. Dabo Swinney is just hilarious to listen to with all the stuff that he tries to, all the narratives that he puts together about his team and for his team to try and get going in the mass media, which really isn't something that's being talked about. It's kind of funny. It's just hilarious. So Clemson, we expected them to get in from the beginning of the season based on how their schedule looked. And, I mean, they're there again, right? But really taking a look at Clemson, they have a legitimate chance to repeat and win this college football playoff again. I'll talk about that here in a second. But number 4, Oklahoma barely squeezed one out versus Baylor, 30-23. Essentially could have dominated that game. They started that game in a dominant fashion. Jalen Hurts put them on their back foot with the stupid turnovers, man. And if he continues to play like that, they're going to get absolutely routed versus any one of these 3 teams. But they're going to be taking on LSU. So any type of mistakes by Jalen Hurts like we saw versus Baylor, that's going to be a 14-point swing, 21-point swing, because LSU is the type of team that will capitalize on those turnovers. Moving along, we saw the Pac-12 championship game where essentially Utah got absolutely routed and throttled by Oregon. But really, that game, I did have Utah winning 31-27. But in that game, if you listen to my predictions, the game went exactly how I thought it would. I thought both offenses would find success in the first half, and Utah did find success, but essentially they changed the momentum of the game when Tyler Huntley threw a pick for the turnover in the end zone, as well as they didn't get the first down inside Oregon territory, going for it on fourth in the first on the first possession of the game. And so those were two big time momentum turning plays. And they were having successful offensive drives. They just weren't able to get points or finish those drives. And that ended up critical, because in my prediction, I also talked about in the second half, we would see Utah begin to dominate at the line of scrimmage. And we saw that defense show up. Finally, the offense showed up. But at that point, it was too late. Oregon was able to pull away. Final score, Oregon 37-15. We're going to see Oregon in the Rose Bowl versus Wisconsin, which should be a dope game to watch. I like this matchup a lot. Definitely one of those games that you're going to want to tune into. I think it's going to be on January 1st. But yeah, keeping it moving. AAC, right? The AAC, I talked about it about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I thought Memphis was the best team in the group of 5, and it looks like they're going to be the one to capture that New York 6 bowl berth, right? So they're going to be playing Penn State. Penn State, a lot of people, Penn State fans actually, saying, Penn State got snubbed. They should have been in the Rose Bowl. Well, beat Minnesota and dominate Michigan. That's exactly what Wisconsin did. They dominated Michigan and they dominated Minnesota. Common opponent factor, along with Ohio State. Penn State in that game, yes, they lost by 11 points. Wisconsin lost by, 13 points, 12 points, something like that. And really, the thing is, Penn State really wasn't in that first game at Ohio State. Ohio State pretty much shot themselves in the foot with the 3 turnovers to keep Penn State in that game. Essentially, that game should have been 21 or 28-0 at the half. Anyways, so we're going to see Memphis play Penn State. I don't even remember the name of that bowl, but we're going to see them play each other in the bowl game. Boise State over in the Mountain West Conference. I had Hawaii winning that game 41-38. And obviously Boise went ahead and not necessarily blew them out, but they dominated the game 31-10. Hawaii, they just couldn't finish in the red zone. I believe they made 2 to 3 red zone trips and came out with 0 points. So whenever you do that, you're not going to put yourself in a position to win the game. Over in the Sun Belt, Appalachia State, they played Louisiana, right? University of Louisiana Lafayette. And Appalachian State, man, they essentially had a chance to go perfect on this season. We got the one loss versus Georgia Southern, but sitting at 12-1, ranked 20th in the college football playoff rankings, I believe. They're going to play UAB in a bowl game where they're probably going to smash. But it's tough, because if they could have stayed undefeated, they probably would have found themselves in that New York 6 slot. But yeah, there was a close game towards the end with Louisiana Lafayette. Majority of the game was looking like a blowout. At one point, Appalachia State was up 28-7, and then it was 42-17. And then Louisiana somehow found themselves in position to tie the game. The final ended up being 45-38. Definitely a lot higher scoring than I thought the final would be. Obviously, I had it at 27-20 in favor of Appalachia State. But that's college football. That's just what you get on a week-to-week basis. You don't know what you're going to get. In the college football playoff final rankings, we got LSU at number 1, Ohio State number 2, Clemson number 3, and Oklahoma at number 4. Now, as far as who I believe will find themselves in the final, I think if we start with the first matchup, right, LSU and Oklahoma, for the most part, it's really just an obvious outcome, right? We're expecting LSU to pull that out because of the way they've been playing throughout the season and because of the way Oklahoma has looked versus a weak opposition. And so, for many different reasons, right, majority of us who have been following this college football season, we have LSU winning this game comfortably. Now, in the second matchup, that's where we're going to have a real game, because almost everything in every phase of the game matches up very well. We take a look at the talent on both sides, right? Ohio State, They get 4 stars and 5 stars. Clemson, 4 stars and 5 stars. I'm sure Ohio State has more 5 stars and whatnot and higher recruits, but essentially the talent level is the same. We look at the offense, how they've been performing throughout the season. Both offenses have been performing at a high level. Defenses have been phenomenal. Clemson is flying around. They're not as big or physical at the point of attack or on the defensive front, I should say, but they are very fast. Ohio State, we look at their defense. They are pretty physical at the point of attack on defense in their front seven, and they've definitely got Chase Young, which is a big X factor. But throughout these past few weeks, Michigan and Wisconsin, we've seen both of those teams come in with a much better game plan to essentially shut him down for a majority of the game. And I expect Clemson, they obviously have the personnel to come up with a similar game plan and execute it. But yeah, we'll see how much of a factor Chase Young is in this matchup. The biggest thing that typically isn't factored in is the battle of attrition, right? It's something that I've talked about on a consistent base throughout this season. Clemson has the biggest advantage against the battle of attrition. What is that? That's how healthy they're coming in, how rested they're coming in. And they're both. They're rested and they're healthy. Why? It's simple, because of their schedule, right? Now, even though we knock their schedule, I do think they're one of the best teams in the country and they do belong in the top 4. But they do have an advantage. Whether or not you want to admit it, it doesn't matter. They have an advantage because they are rested and they're healthy. And we can't say the same for the majority of teams competing in the Big Ten or the SEC, right? In both of those conferences, you're having to battle your ass off for each and every win for the majority of the season, right? They're seeing teams, Ohio State's seeing teams like Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, all those top echelon teams, Penn State, and then Louisiana, aka LSU, they're seeing Alabama, Florida, Auburn. Now, the final score may indicate that they dominated that game, but they're still having to battle and grind out those wins, right? Where Clemson, on the other hand, is beating their opponents by, a 30-plus margin, something like that. So, like I said, I think Clemson belongs in the top 4, don't get me wrong, but they certainly have an advantage in this matchup. And I think for that reason, and many other reasons that I'll get into once I cover this matchup in depth, I think we're going to see Clemson and LSU in the final. Clemson and LSU in the final. I think it's going to be a great semifinal between Ohio State and Clemson, but I just get the feeling that Clemson will just be healthier. They're going to be much better. And like I said, I'll get into much better depth once we get closer to this matchup. But LSU-Clemson final, that's my prediction right now. Unless something changes, somebody gets hurt during a practice or a training, whatever it may be. With all that being said, appreciate you guys for listening. We're going to get into all the college football playoff stuff very soon here, but we've got about 2 to 3 weeks before we hit those games. But also the bowl games I'll be talking about. With that said, thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting the channel. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, evening, or night. Like, comment, and subscribe. This is Justin, the Critic, signing off. Peace.
His light shine the brightest in the dark. Single mothers know they get my heart.